Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Hazzed, and today we're going to be talking about how to critique your DK stats to get your character to reach those mythic numbers you got to be doing to push through, of course, heroic and or mythic rating and or mythic plus dungeons. Because right now, DKs aren't the highest on the DPS list. Obviously, coming up with them next buffs, we're definitely going to be ripping quite a bit more damage to our single target spec, since the buff is really based around obliterate, and a lot of obliterate damage at that. Anyways, guys, let's go ahead and jump into this and talk about some stats. Now, of course, this video is going to be for the more geared DKs. I mean, if you have, smaller gear, chances are you should just be trying to grind up your raw stat and your item level until reaching a certain point. But if you can go for some of these key things, it is going to make your DPS better off, especially if you are playing this spec. Now, if you're playing like the breath spec or something else, I would have to say transition out of using that for PvE at somewhere around the heroic rating item level. Somewhere around there you want to transfer over to the consistency spec. I'm not going to call it the machine gun spec unless I will make one deal with the people watching. I will call it the machine gun spec, the one I'm using right here. I will call it that if we call the breath spec no longer the breath spec, but we have to call it the Super Alpha Omega Dragon Destruction 4000, right? Because everyone knows there's no machine guns in the game. So obviously I can name it whatever I want, right? Because we're just going with that. We're just rolling with it. Jokes aside, getting back to these stats, guys, just base stats. One of the most important stats out there, of course, is to get your haste to around 20%. And the reason being is because when you're running, Frozen Pulse, things like that, your melee speed, your rune regeneration, all that comes into play with dealing some consistent damage. Now, one of the things I did notice, now you notice I'm not using Frozen Pulse. This is my PvE spec right now. This is my single target spec. And the reason being is once you get your artifact level up high enough to get overpowered on your artifact list, your rotation will fill that gap itself, and Frozen Pulse will actually fall off as being nearly one of the lowest damaging abilities, since with all this extra runic power gain and extra haste, basically you're so stocked up on runes and runic power all the time that you get no downtime. So Frozen Pulse becomes terrible. So I switched that out for Freezing Fog, get a little extra AoE damage, of course, get a little consistency from that Frost Fever damage. Because of course, a lot of the times, a lot of your DPS in raids is getting lower as Frost because of the time you spent off the boss, the time that your dots are taking on the target, and the time you get back to it is going to hurt your DPS as a Frost DK just about more than anything, because our consistency with this spec is actually really strong compared to other classes. A lot of other classes have a bit stronger burst than us, unless the like the moon lines up and then we get our breath crit, and then we can actually shoot up to 800k plus DPS. But generally we're within the 450 to about 600k DPS marker in there, which isn't bad at all. I mean, that's about usually about fifth when it comes to a normal raid spot. So it's not terrible at all. And of course, if we throw in Lust and we get a crit, you could be peaking almost 1 million. Like, it's pretty wild DPS on a Frost DK, especially when it lines up. Now, guys, what I'm going to talk to you right here before we get into the other stats, of course, we just talked about haste, which is the most important stat, like I just said, and then we got crit. Now, crit, guys, people have said you want to get around 30% crit. Personally, I don't think there's much of a crit cap. Crit is going to stack better than mastery when it comes to raw damage with this spec, especially since all those little hits, all that consistency. Of course, since our major dragon breath relies on crit to enhance our DPS way past what people really usually see a Frost DK doing. And really, haste seems to be the most important thing as a Frost DK. I also stay away from versatility when it comes down to it. That makes actual PvP gear not very great for Frost DKs when it comes to pushing through PvE content. I've noticed that having extra versatility has weighed down a lot of my DPS. So even if I got a high level PvP item with versatility, I wouldn't sacrifice it out for a piece of PvE gear. I mean, unless it's like 10 or 15 item levels higher, obviously the raw stats may make up for it. But until then, I can't see myself using a lot of PvE gear in PvE settings, since these off stats tend to be so they're needed. You have to reach these certain points, otherwise you can't complete your rotation on a Frost DK. Um, Other than that, stacking crit and mastery after haste, it's about as basic as it gets, guys. I'd stack crit over mastery, and from there you just critique your character, gear up. Like it's not gonna be too hard to do, guys. But talking about bursting on a target like raid DPS and stuff, without raid buffs, without my flask, without popping a lot of potions, I generally can put around I said on average about 450 to about 600 DPS. One of the hardest parts I'll show you on this thing over here is you'll notice my empowered rune or fallen rune weapon, fallen crusader. There we go. Will proc up generally fast on a target like this, right there, 3 seconds. If that was PvE, if that was a boss, I would love it. That was a pretty fast proc. Not angry about it at all. Now, when it comes to actually DPSing on a raid boss, sometimes that won't proc for nearly 10 seconds. And that is the worst DPS lead off you can ever have when it comes to a Frost DK, because that's really going to nerf your damage. It's going to make your breath not do nearly as much for your numbers, especially in comparison to a lot of the other raiders. So what you have to do on a Frost DK when you're opening up is get on your target. Now, what I generally do is run up on something partway through the air, like I do this little hop, right? I throw in this Remorseless Winter. So I hit Remorseless Winter in midair. I usually hit my cooldowns when I'm about to land right here. So I literally follow in with the Remorseless Winter that I used on my own global cooldown, not when I'm hitting the boss, so it instantly ticks right away. Alright, so like I don't have to use that global, it's not hurting my DPS, it's actually amplifying my DPS since I used it before I initiated combat. And then of course once you do that little hop, I'm going to do kind of a slow motion here and try to keep it spread out. Boom! Remorseless Winter Hop. I'm in on the target. Make sure your melee swinging. Now we had an Unholy Strength proc up, which was what I was talking about. Very good. Now right there you instantly blow your cooldowns. I'll show my little cooldown here. Where are my add-ons? That's not the button I wanted here. Alright, so real quick, going over this, I basically just have, of course, Pillar of Frost, a Potion of some. I got Chill Streak in here. That's more of the PvP side of this little macro. And, of course, I got the Racial. So, it's nothing really technical, but it's just to stack up the attack power and, of course, any damage and or strength, because strength also stacks on the attack power for our Dragon Breath to come out. Now, our Dragon Breath is going to hit anywhere between normally about 12 to about 18 million, and if you can crit, it's going to hit from about 28 to close to 36 million in a raid setting. So you can tell that's a giant difference when it comes to actual DPS on your DPS meter. So you really need to proc all those correctly, otherwise your dragon is going to have you sitting at about 350 to about 400 DPS if you don't proc those correctly, and then you have to play the catch-up game most of the fight to catch up to the other DPS. So that opener for us, guys, is very important, and then from there our consistency is solid enough that we have no problems at all keeping up with a lot of other classes within the raid setting. Because I can easily stay within top 5 on a Frost DK, on Nathandra, on Ursoc at the moment. I'm really not having troubles at all. I mean, once in a while, like I said, I'll get a really bad pull with a proc lasts 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and I'm really hurting for some DPS there. But what I've noticed, guys, if you don't have the proc, like if that doesn't proc up after the first couple obliterates, go into your rotation. Don't wait for it. Go into your rotation after those couple obliterates, after you stack on the 5%. Or the 10% extra frost damage, which I believe will be 15% once we get it buffed again. Here coming Tuesday, excited for that. After you get that stacked up, go ahead and unleash that dragon, blow your cooldowns, and go into rotation, because it's really going to hurt you if you try and kind of lean back and wait for that proc to allow your dragon to go off. Now let me show you guys kind of a slow-mo opener, because the opener is really important. It really took me a while to get down how to burst with this spec and come out kind of doing some big DPS. Now remember what I said, you kind of hop through the air with Remorseless Winter. That Remorseless Winter not only is going to deal extra ticking damage, that of course is on your global time, it's also going to generate a slight amount of runic power for you to get closer to dumping your Frost Strikes and your Obliterates, because right off the bat, I'm throwing out my Dragon if I possibly can, I'm throwing out my major cooldowns, and then I'm going to throw out Obliteration so I can dump Frost Strikes and Obliterates and get crits. Now, within that first cooldown session, you're going to blow Empowered Rune Weapon, while you're throwing out those Frost Strikes and Obliterates. This is going to give you that big jump at the start of the fight to keep up with a lot of the other classes' major bursts. And of course, like I said, our consistency is not the problem. So our consistency is fine after that. But the hardest part about pulling out numbers that are acceptable in like a Mythic raid setting is mainly that opener and whether or not you can get things to line up. Now I'm going to try and get things to kind of line up here for us. I'm going to kind of do my hop. I'm going to slow it down just a little bit for you guys. Hop through the air. Boom, throw out the cooldowns, hitting my obliterates coming in. I got proc right there, dragon coming out, hitting obliteration, and then dumping frost strike back and forth, using empower in the middle of dumping back and forth between those two, because there's a slight global cooldown when you use empower and you're actually DPSing on a target, that you can actually use the empower without, you know, causing your globals to go off, so you can keep up that consistent DPS. Now right there I peaked above about 600k DPS, and yeah, we're dropping down to about 300 something K at the moment, because I'm just gonna let it fall off at this point because I'm not worried about it. But anyways, guys, we peaked about 600k plus. We didn't get a crit. That was just our normal opener. As I said, you can hit about 600k between 450k, not very hard, completely acceptable in any rating and or Mythic Plus content at the moment. Obviously you have to do the mechanics correctly. But overall, guys, I hope this helped you out for how to produce some major DPS. As I said, if I was flashed, of course, and pre-potting with the right potions during that, I would have easily opened, I'd say, about 7 to 750k. Now, if I also had, let's say there was Lust going off, that would have been 800, 850k. Haste really scales well with the Frost DK. And you can put out quite a bit of numbers after them at the moment, after, of course, reaching those little ability, little hit caps, those hidden hit caps, and really be able to put some major potential on your Frost DK PvE DPS. And of course, if you're going to go through those Mythic Pluses and cleave things down, just pick up that Frost Scythe and go for it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope it helped you out to, you know, help you get your numbers up as a Frost DK, help you peak up a bit more, and of course keep up those consistent numbers. Also within that opener, guys, if you happen to get a Howling Blast, sometimes I'll actually, when I come in on a target, if I don't feel like using a Howling Blast proc during that opener because it will lower your DPS, what you can do, of course, is when you're running in on your charger, is when you're jumping through the air, you can hit Remorseless Winter about right back here, and then when you're coming down, hit about Howling Blast right there, and then go into your consistent bursting damage rotation spec. It will also peak you up to be one of the highest ways to burst. And of course, it also applies your dot so you don't have to do it. Now, later on, once your obliteration falls off, of course, you go back to using your Howling Blast to reapply a dot that actually has your cooldown dots on it, so you will be replacing that pretty soon. But if your dot, of course, goes on the target and it procs that extra 100k proc that we have on our artifact weapon, it can increase your DPS by quite a lot. But yeah, that about sums it up, I've got to say, for doing DPS in Mythic Plus and Heroic Bosses, guys. If you go ahead and do that, of course, your DPS is also rely on how far you are on your artifact talents. If you guys don't have, you know, like the extra 40% offhand damage, things like that, it's going to be really hard for your DPS to actually reach the numbers of a Heroic or Mythic Raider. Of course, you got to go big on your artifact weapon and get them, get those situated out. So yeah, potions you should be using. If you want to be using potions, you should be either using the potion that causes little 2 archers to come down and shoot people, or the one Deadly Grace that shoots little, you know, black orbs and hits bosses for a pretty good amount of magic damage. One of those two is going to be the best to choose. As for enchants, now you see I'm already at 20% haste, guys. If you don't have 20% haste, throw haste enchants on like your rings, your neck, your back, just to get those extra stats trying to reach you to that point. But after that, as you can see, you can go ahead and build crit enchants, throw in crit gems on your rings. If you have a gem spot, obviously the legendary does. And as for like your cloak enchant, go ahead and throw that 200 strength on there. You want that. And of course, I got crit gem in that because I have, you know, enough haste. I don't have to build that anymore. But anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope it's helped you out to actually critique your damage a bit to reach that Heroic Mythic Plus DPS standard. I believe you guys are not going to have much of a problem doing it, especially after you commit. It's not very hard to do. It's not very hard to reach these numbers if you really want to. Of course, with enchants and of course switching gear out. Now, would I suggest changing out gear to reach these? It may be a good idea if you're planning on playing this specific spec, because this specific spec only works under, of course, those certain stat abilities. If you got like 10% haste, I don't think this build is going to actually cause you to do more DPS than if you took Frost Scythe and had more of a larger mastery build. So the off stats actually do come into play a lot when it comes into which spec you're playing, because early on, of course, I was playing the Frost breath spec, and I had a ton of mastery, not very much crit, not very much haste. Of course, I had trinkets that were based around strength, which of course elongated the breath, made it do more damage. And of course, I could control it at the time, which made that spec really good. And then, of course, as it transferred over, I ended up getting proc trinkets, I ended up getting haste, ended up getting crit. It all just kind of formed together, and this is where we've ended up. So, hopefully, you guys have kind of enjoyed this video, and hope this is going to help you out to your stuff, guys. I think I'm going to wrap it up here, as this is my second version of recording this and trying to make it work. The other one just did not fill out very well, guys, and I didn't want to post that late last night. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this, and until next time, leave a like. This was your boy Hazzed.